Welcome, welcome to the EJ Movement Fellowship. And I got Jesus Vasquez from Puerto Rico, EJ Movement Fellow Extraordinaire, Agroecologista Extraordinaire, and someone who I've known for quite a bit of years and who's been manifesting and living out the just transition in many different ways, right? I think in ways that go beyond what we'll be talking about today in the framework. And so welcome, Jesus.
Gracias. Thank you. It's good to be here in this afternoon in the middle of the week. So happy we're doing this.
Thank you. Yes, and so I'm calling in from Seminole, Miccosukee territories in Miami, old Islandia, and Jesus is calling in from where?
So I'm calling in from Boriquen, otherwise recognized by Puerto Rico. It's a group of islands in the Caribbean region. And I'm calling from San Juan right now.
Beautiful. Yeah, and so our goal here is really to share with the rest of you fellows that are participating in the lead up for phase 2, some of the frameworks that we've used to ground the fellowship in the collective leadership model that we're using. Remember that we're moving from the problem and really narrowing the problem to then moving into phase 2, where we're opening the possibilities of what you will hear often as the how might we resolve this? How might we address this? How might we include all the possibilities of solutions? So once again, in phase 2, we're opening up and we're looking forward to seeing everyone in Miami. But right now, for maybe the next 30 minutes or so, or 40 minutes, we'll talk about this framework. And so I'm going to share my screen so that we can reference it. Knowing that we have, I think both Jesus and myself being in the movement for a couple of decades, at least, been living and experiencing the just transition framework from many different ways, and maybe finding ourselves within the framework and beyond the framework. But to start off, just a little bit of a basis on this. So as you see, I'm referencing the Climate Justice Alliance, and I think the communities that came together to form the alliance worked with Movement Generation and some of the real originary communities that supported developing the just transition in the early 90s. You know, folks like Tom Goldtooth from the Indigenous Environmental Network, Richard Moore, Pam Tali from the Chinese Progressive Association, who's one of the EJ Advisory Committee members with us, Jose Bravo from the Just Transition Alliance, who's worked for many, many years with unions and workers and different manifestations of meaningful work. Connie Tucker from the Southern Organizing Committee for Economic and Social Justice, who's not with us, but who's left us a tremendous amount of knowledge and wisdom on environmental justice. And Richard Moore, I think I mentioned earlier, who's on the WEJAC right now and who's work through Los Jardines Institute intersects, economic, environmental justice and food justice. And there's many other people who supported in the development of this, both in its original conception of a just transition, which was very much worker focused, right? Transitioning workers out of extractive and polluting industry and providing an opportunity for a transition to a more meaningful work relationship. So Tony Mazzocchi is often referenced as, the person within the labor movement who worked with the Just Transition Alliance and many others in original EJ movement to start developing this concept of the framework around just transition. And then when the Climate Justice Alliance in its original alignment came together with, maybe 24, 36 communities, there was an intentional transition, if you will, to move from just a worker-focused just transition to a community-focused transition. And then being able to visualize a diagram or something that people can reference regardless of where they are coming into, and provide that as a roadmap for what we're trying to do systemically. So that's it. This is the analysis and the framework. And when we did the landscape assessment, when we started figuring out what we could be providing in this leadership fellowship, we interviewed about 200 people. A large portion of that, the majority of that, referenced the just transition as a framework that they thought was helpful to develop strategies around energy democracy, climate justice, housing justice, environmental racism, stopping the polluting industries, and being able to mobilize and organize towards a common vision. So just to also ground us in like what we're seeing here, and then we're going to open up for a back and forth conversation, is the framework itself is moving us from, on the left, the extractive economy to a regenerative economy. And it gives us the roadmap on how to do that. First articulating what an extractive economy is, right? It has a particular worldview. It's extractive in the way that we interact with resources. It has a very specific purpose to concentrate wealth and power. And it uses militarization as the governance vehicle of regulation, if you will, controlling the labor force or the workers. I mean, it's a classical extractive model, and it's using the power of governance as the mechanism for continuing that extractive model. And a number of communities in environmental justice stories talk about that extractive model being like the sacrifice zone, right? In order for this system to continue to produce, there needs to be a space or an area of sacrifice to allow that to continue to produce. And then on the other side, you have the regenerative economy. It's like, what is it that we're trying to change? Maybe to create that worldview that is more centered around caring and sacredness, allowing to have a strong interrelated relationship with Mother Nature and with spirituality. The purpose, instead of concentrating wealth and power, is to have ecological, social well-being, abundance, which means for enough for everyone. And then the governance structure would be more of a deep democracy, right? Self-governance, aspiration for the people to govern themselves and to develop the kinds of legislative tools or the kinds of tools for being that are self-regulated, self-promoting. And then finally, resources are viewed as regenerative, right? So we're producing not just to produce and extract, but producing to give more life in return. And then ultimately, work is not an extractive labor producing mechanism, but more a cooperative, meaningful place of coming together and regenerating the earth. So those are the two. This is what we're moving away or what we're stopping. Often we talk about stopping the bad, and we're going to a regenerative economy where we're building the new, what we need right now and for the future. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll talk more about what the just transition, this pace in the middle, is and how we've experienced it. So I guess, Jesus, as we start, I know we want to deepen with the problem, but where and how have you been exposed to the just transition framework? What's been your experience? Talk about it a bit.
Yeah, so thanks for the frame. Let's see. So in our case in Boriquén here in Puerto Rico, we have been doing this kind of work related to just transition, environmental justice, food sovereignty, climate justice, all of these intersections, even before we had these terms. And I think it is very important, and also in this framework that you shared, just to highlight that all of this wisdom has been built through decades of hard work, of people on the front lines, on the communities, grassroots organizations, just doing a lot of organizing, solving problems, but at the same time, doing everything they can to live the way they want, and also planning for the future. So in the case of the organization that I represent, that has been going on for 33 years now, they were doing agroecology, they were doing just transition work, food sovereignty work, as I mentioned before these terms happen. I think taking the time to like systematize our work and also create theory, it's very important. But we come from a culture of practice and also theory, but balance. And also, if we need to do one of more, it's gonna be practice, because the times ask for it. And in terms of how we see just transition in the work that I've been doing for the past like 12 to 13 years, it has a lot to do with food systems, right? And agriculture in specific. So just transition in that landscape for us would be agroecology. And agroecology is a sustainable way of producing food without exploiting any form of life, like this extractive system does, and also respecting the limits of Mother Nature. And in that sense, it's also, we're saying like food and agriculture needs to be in the hands of the people, not in the hands of a handful of corporations, right? So in that sense, that's how, from an industrial model, from a capitalist economy that promotes agribusiness, that promotes huge farms that are like monocrops and that exploit a lot of workers, and that it's all for profit and not defending the land or promoting sustainability. So we come from this millennial ancestral approach that we also know it's technology, because there's a lot of wisdom and technology in these practices. And the way of producing this food, it's not only healthy food, but it's proved that it provides in abundance. So that's a little bit about the landscape that I've been working in the past years. And also in terms of just transition, living and doing a lot of organizing in Boriquén, in Puerto Rico. For us, just transition work is also work for the transformation of our reality. In this case, the struggle for our sovereignty. And just transition means that we're practicing that sovereignty in our communities, in our farms. We're not depending from external resources. We're doing mutual support and meaningful work in our communities, resolving our own problems, while we still challenge the government and any public policy that Puerto Rico deserves. But we're living sovereignty in practice, and also while defending the national patrimony, that the government is not doing that, right? So we have a lot of educational projects, small farms, rescued land, where we're practicing all of those principles. And our strategy is to keep scaling up, right? We are already all over the 3 islands that are part. I mean, Puerto Rico is more than 3 islands, but the 3 islands where people live, and the idea is to have that culture of practice and have access to land, because we believe that that is very powerful. And once we know how to live independently, the other part of having that in a legal paper will be easier. And also recognizing the work, the historical work of our martyrs, of people that have given their life for the independence and sovereignty struggle in our island. So in essence, just transition work for us, it's like respecting the limits of Mother Nature and building the culture of practice that we believe and that we know our ancestors come from. And at the same time, achieving, practicing our liberation, our self-determination, and the solidarity and mutual support work that distinguishes us.
Yeah, so I was wondering if we could do it a little bit step by step, because as you were talking, what came up for me was what I like about this framework. And you know what, there are pros and cons, light and shadow, whatever word you want to use about this framework. We've heard it, right? Because this was a little bit of a marriage between movement and academy, if you will, right? Like curriculum. This is like moving into like, how do we develop a shared curriculum understanding? Like you said, it's practice and theory coming together. And so we hear that from communities, to be fair, right? They're saying, this doesn't fully translate for us on the ground. It's hard to talk about to a campesino about regenerative economy, right? Like even talking about the economy is a hard thing to not, can hold in your hand. And so a lot of communities, environmental justice communities, food sovereignty communities have been, their leaders have been doing that, right? They've been translating it up and down, back and forth and across. But what I like about the framework is that we never say in this framework that that environmental justice, like we do actually honor a lot of the different principles and frameworks that have come before here. So we always say the environmental justice movement came with its own, its 17 principles. We try to apply those. A lot of folks try to come together and say, how do we translate this? One of my favorite parts of this is the actual false solutions. They're very concise. I'd like us to maybe go there, but what can we try, Jesus, to map the food sovereignty movement more like step by step from the extractive into the regenerative based on, let's say, La Villa's example, because we kind of come from that. Jesus and I met through La Villa Campesina and the North American collective leadership model there. And maybe we can articulate how Villa has used, or how the food sovereignty movement as a whole has used international, national, local policy tools even to help do some of the things you were saying. I was trying to put the mouse when you were talking a little bit like, oh, that seems like it's the worldview. Oh, that seems like a new orientation to resources. You want to try that? Should we try that? Okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, so where in the extractive economy, where's the food sovereignty movement? Like, how do you see it live in the industrial agricultural model?
Yeah. So So in the extractive economy, there's like that middle part where it says like exploitation, and in the left it says resources extraction, right? Around there, and also like the purpose, right? The public policy on the right would be the center of the agribusiness model, right? They call it also the industrial model. It came after the Green Revolution, where in order to have food for the people of the world and address hunger, we need a lot of inputs in farming and also produce a lot of food. That was an excuse for agrochemical companies to really expand their profit, and also be in charge of not only, for example, some of these corporations, they own the seeds, they own the fertilizers, they own many of the inputs that you need to produce food, and they just want to have farmers to be in debt or to pay them for their resources. When in La Villa Campesina, the international movement for farming, for food sovereignty, we're saying seeds are un patrimonio de la humanidad, a patrimony of humanity. Seeds are from nature, so it's the right of the people to have them, to protect them. That the seeds that we have and that we protect has been shared with us from generation to generation, and are the ones that are more adequate for our climate and our context. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, from a model that extracts from Mother Nature as if there were no limits, and also exploits every form of life, we then go to the regenerative part, and we're in terms of the work that we mostly do, we would be saying our solution is food sovereignty. It's similar, it's another term like just transition, but in terms of the farming and rural organizing world, just considering that food sovereignty also encompasses recollectors, fisher folk, landless people, etc. But it would be food sovereignty. What we want is that the food and farming would be in the hands of the people, not in a handful of corporations, and also that the countries and the people be in charge of the food that they produce. So the nations need to promote to harvest their own food, because we don't want to be dependent on the resources of others. That's what normally happens in a globalist neoliberal economy, right? So in that sense, food sovereignty is a lot about the territory. How can we produce in a sustainable way the food that we need to survive? And that way we're respecting the limits of nature, and at the same time we're making sure that people have one of the most essential things, that's food to live, right? And what we've been seeing in terms of some of the challenges is that this industrial agri-food system wants to replace people, peasants, farmers, farm workers, with technology. In this case, more machine-like technology. It sounds like a sci-fi movie, but it's really happening. Some of the terms they use is climate smart agriculture, etc. And we need to never forget, especially those of us that live in, or in the case of Puerto Rico, we have a relationship with the US, but especially people from the US, from Canada, from Europe, from developed nations, is that in Latin America, Central, Caribbean, South America, Africa, Asia, the peasant, the farmer population is very large. It's millions and millions and millions of people. So in that sense, there's an important statistic from one of our allies from grain that they mentioned in like around 60 to 60% to 60 to 70% of the food produced in the world is produced by small scale farmers in a lot of places where these food sovereignty principles are practiced. And in around 30% of the available arable land, for farming. And in the other hand, so approximately 70% of the land available for farming in the world is in the hands of these agrochemical corporations, but they only produce around 30% of the food. So it is very important to highlight that fact so that we don't forget the world that we're living, even if we're exposed to just digital technology and a lot of like advertising every day, and we go to the supermarkets and everything is there, all of the brands that we normally know, that we know that this is happening. So in our sense, it's also just protecting, as we do with like the indigenous, the Afro-Caribbean descent. So the peasant and the farming community is for us, it's central for the future of the world.
I love how you're really like, we're doing a very concrete example of food sovereignty. I feel like if we did the same for different sectors, like the housing piece, you know, we have some of the fellows that are working on the built environment right now. What's the opportunity right now to really move things? And what are the things here in the middle, right? Where you see stop the bad, build the new, divest from their power, invest in our power, and this values filter. So I could see different fellows, depending on the sector of work, doing this like layering of food sovereignty through this filter. I look at the framework kind of like a filter, really, right? Like, okay, where are we? I thought before we move directly to the problem, because this is really what we want fellows to do, is to think about the problem statement as you're leaving it in phase one, and trying to develop that story of where it lives. I'm hoping that you're finding it within the extractive system, because it's the problem we're trying to address, right? I think if your problem is moving more into the regenerative economy, this is a tip, then you're probably already working on a solution. So you have to step back, because that's what we're going to do in phase 2. But there are a couple things, and this is, I get a little excited about the way that we change the rules. It's not that we always have to be using the same kind of tools or going through the same government level to change the rules. But I think in the food sovereignty movement, Jesus, there have been very like creative ways that the food sovereignty movement, Avia particularly, has used legislation to be able to change the rules. You started talking about the narrative, right? How important it was to develop a real important narrative shift of like combating the myth of consumerism and colonial mindset, and saying, actually, you're not the ones producing the majority of food, we are. That was a huge shift. When did that happen? 2013, maybe, or a little bit earlier than that? Right, it's like when all of us, all of you, all the peasants were going to the Food and Agriculture Organization, going to the COPs in the UN, doing some of that international building down of power. And then there was some national movement stuff that was happening. I remember back in the day in Venezuela was one of the first who were doing seed sovereignty, right? And then at the local, you were mentioning a number of things that you all were doing at the local level to manifest this change of rules, which ultimately means a change of power. It's not the perfect system, right? That's why it's here in the middle. It's not the full regenerative economy. In the full regenerative economy, we're putting forth legislation that supports our position. In this just transition, we're still in the middle of stopping the bad and building the new. You want to mention anything that's coming to your mind in some of those like legislation that felt critical?
Yeah, so yeah, and I'll mention, like, when we were in Soul to Soul with like It Takes Roots, we had like a workshop where the international delegates, I remember comrades from Brazil, from Mavi and others, we were exposed to the Just Transition framework, and also there was a dialogue of because this framework, or maybe not the framework, but the words, the language, it's more used in the US or North America, right? So in Latin America, normally we're talking about an extractive economy, we're talking about regenerative economy, maybe calling it a solidarity economy or other terms, but we're talking about many of the same things in essence. And I remember, like, for us, there was a conversation about like the term transition being a little bit passive. So like many of the organizations were saying we're working for transformation, right? So maybe like the transformation verb being more, but these were just like an exchange, a dialogue, and also that like the way, like for us, the important thing is that we're doing this work, right? If we're using different words, it's everything is adequate to their own context. But just expressing specifically to what you were saying, yeah, we do a lot of organizing work, like to give accompaniment to our base. So I think like the EJ movement and the Just Transition framework, we need to highlight that it's the needs of the people, right? It needs of the collective decision making. It's from the base, and we are doing mutual support work to solve our problems and also address our needs. And the good thing also with the Just Transition framework is that's also looking for the future. It's not only solving problems, but what, you know, how do we plan to live, how this transition will look. So we know we're doing a lot of like self-organizing. You're recognizing that the government has been corrupt, that the government hasn't been there, national government in our case, but also imperial US government. But we're constantly, every day, proposing public policy. We're meeting at the Senate, we're meeting at the House, even though recognizing that those spaces haven't represented us for the time being, with a few exceptions, but really promoting, even writing the public policy that we know serves our needs. And we do that in alliance with other grassroots organizations that are doing this type of work in Puerto Rico. And we managed to win in many of these struggles. With some of the laws, it has been created by people that have been on the front line. Sometimes we lose, and for us that is the process is important because we learn a lot. And in our case, we like addressing that centerpiece. We talk about at the local level. So it would be like the needs of the community in the municipality. We have in our members even folks that are representative of the Senate or in the House at the municipality level. So they meet every week to deal with the problems and anything that they need to solve at the municipality level. So we do a lot of work at the local level, municipality level, also at the national. In case for us would be Puerto Rico, like the big island, Puerto Rico, we say big island, but small island, but Puerto Rico, Culebra, and Vieques. And we would add another one that would be regional. Like for us, our region is the Caribbean. And there's a lot of history on how we are, how we act, why we eat the food that we eat, why we like the music that we like, that come from that region. So we do a lot of work with other smaller islands in the Caribbean and also bigger islands like Haiti, Dominican Republic, Cuba, etc. And then at the international level, at the global level, we learn in many of these instances from many comrades, from many organizations, from many processes. And in the case of Puerto Rico, that is very important because of our colonial context. Many times at the international law spaces, at the UN level, the US talks for us, right? Because we're considered by law a US territory. So just like our folks in Guam, in the Mariana Islands in the Pacific. So it's very important to be present as Puerto Ricans in the international level because we can speak from our own experiences and don't have an intermediary like the US talk for us.
That's exciting. Yeah, I also was starting to think like, what are some things that I've heard from communities that have been using the framework and ways to update it, and even how we've been doing it from the state side. So the regional one, for sure, heard a lot, like we have to have region, like that's the most decolonial way to be organizing ourselves because it breaks from the imaginary boundaries and borders and gives us power to be in relationship with Mother Earth in ways that regions can really communicate and share culture, like you're saying, and good local practice with the earth. So yes, I would, if we were to do modifications, whatever, I think the regional piece would be a big one. You know, I think the work that the food sovereignty movement has done with the COPs, is done with the UN, and even early times with a number of decision makers. I remember there was a real intentional interaction with the Pope at one time, even, right, to make sure to say that food was a human right, that peasants had rights, right? There was an intentional work, one with the UN around the rights of the peasant, that got ratified and then created opportunities at the national level and at the local level to then be able to demand those rights because international level supersedes national and local politics. So I think there's so many learning lessons there. And like you said, it's not that we're buying into the government formation now as our government, because, you know, I think history has proven over and over again that that's not the case, but that we're utilizing all of these kinds of tools to reach where we ideally want to be, and to be able to divest and integrate more of the values filter. So I've also heard communities talk more about the values filter. And if we could then now, you know, really focus on this values filter of shifting the economic control to communities, which localizing, strong advocate for localizing, you know, a lot since the framework was developed has been focused right now on racial justice and social equity in much more tangible ways than when the framework was put together, to be honest. And then also a lot of what you're saying, which is the relocalization of production and consumption. And I think a lot about the work that we did together in solidarity after Maria, of like, how do you not come and, you know, present the framework, but really internalize it in solidarity? So we, you know, I remember that a lot in how that was a moment of not always Puerto Rico coming to US and being a solidarity partner of global South partners in the global North, but how global South partners in the global North were able to come to the Caribbean nation of Borinquen and help farmers in doing that solidarity, brigade, collective and cooperative work for ecological and social well-being. And there's so many great memories there. And if you weren't there, then you weren't there. But you might have an opportunity, because disaster is a real thing, right? It happens constantly. So it is a methodology that then, like you said, Jesus, really emphasizes cooperation, and the brigades that have sustained Organización Boricua for its inception, since its inception. Cool. I mean, I could do this. I love to like do this with different sectors too, and we could do this for a long time. But I thought, as an example, we could transition to your group problem, Las Jotas problem. And we hope that other fellow core groups are doing this as well before we get into phase 2. So that's our invitation. You would have, I think the order is, you see video 1 with Ana and hopefully Maria, who both offered to do a grounding in environmental justice. Environmental justice being environmental racism that then moved to proactively rebrand itself as environmental justice to have more power in the kind of future that we want to have based in justice. And that they'll be talking about the environmental justice principles and having similarly like a reflection of like, this is when it was created, how does it look now? And so you see that video, and then you move to this video where, you know, Jesus and I are having a similar conversation. And then we ask you as a core group to try to map your problem in the framework. So let's do the example. And I know you have your problem in Spanish, and we can also say it in English.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, I just want to add, just knowing that we're in this process with the EJM fellowship. Yeah, we have the benefit, our cohort group, that we live in Puerto Rico, which is in the same nation, right? And also it's not big, so we can see each other with easily, right? It's not that difficult for us. So we've been meeting regularly, and we like I think we think too much, which I don't think it's a bad thing, but we stay a lot of time just like thinking and writing stuff down. So in the first phases, we had our problem kind of defined, but it was like a matrix document with like bullets, like context, some language, but not like this is like the 6 lines that define our problem for now, and it's consensus by the 3 of us. So we managed after the last retreat to do that. We are happy with this language. So I'm gonna say it while I interpret, like translate at the same time. So that.
But can I ask you, Jesus,
yeah.
Did you incorporate some of the phone calls as well, right? Like the curious and courageous conversations into this, right?
Yeah, this happened like 2 days ago. So we have encompassed everything that happened before like 2 days ago, and it's been like I think it was mentioned by some of you in the staff. Like the idea is that, you know, it's not like completely finalized and defined. Like this process is also a lot about change. So yeah, I'm gonna say it, and then we can talk about it. So it says, so we live in Boriquen, in Puerto Rico, an archipelago, which is a group of islands, a tropical archipelago within a colonial regime that depends in a large measure of resources from other countries, and that is guided by an economical model that is based in extraction and exploitation. So that's the first premise. And then we say, as a country, we lack a coherent vision that permits us to create an exciting narrative that moves us to sustainability, always respecting the limits of Mother Earth, especially in the century of climate change. So that's the wording that we have. It's a little bit long. I think we can make it shorter, but just in essence, we're talking like, yeah, we're highlighting our colonial context as Puerto Rico, and also our dependence, which also is related to colonialism, on the resources that we use. It's not only food. I mean, around 80 to 85% of the food that we consume in Puerto Rico come from abroad, but it also has to do with the energy system, like the fossil fuels, textiles, a lot of stuff that we are taking and using from other countries, and that the economic model is a capitalist model, right? And we to add two other elements that we need to work on a coherent vision, collective vision, and work on the narrative, on our narrative, in a sufficient scale to create change. So that's a little bit about our problem.
How did it feel to finally say it?
It felt good. I mean, it was I insisted a lot on, we're gonna take time after having like this big document to really write the lines. We did an exercise similar to what we've been doing in the EJM, like taking everyone each time to write something down after we had like a conversation, just summarizing the process, because sometimes we start to talk before reviewing what we've done. So it was very important to really read everything, because we spent a lot of time already on, and I remember, Juan, that you said this, remember Julio that you said this, and we were all in agreement. So it was a very important thing to refresh. And then we took we said 10 minutes. I think we did like 15 minutes each. And we wrote, and then we did like the soup, we mixed it up. Some of the way we wrote it, like we live in Puerto Rico, an archipelago, blah. It was like in present tense, because some of us write it more neutral, right? So we like this wording that Julio was the one that like more kind of, like our daily lives, right? Yeah. So yeah, that's a little bit about it.
That's beautiful. I think it's what I'm excited about is that you have you're clearly in the extractive economy. I think you even mentioned that, it's mentioned in the way that you articulate what you need. You talk about the relationships between all of these circles in a way, without even probably looking at the framework. It probably came, like you said, from your own practice of the work that you do together. And I love that you say it's good enough where it is, right? I think part of what we were doing is the synthesis really matters. Like the way that you said, we spend time synthesizing, and it's exciting to know that it's very similar to what you came in with, right? And in this process, it's like we were reaffirmed that in this first phase, we're still in this problem state. When we go into phase 2, and for others, we're going to do this again, but with more of figuring out which part of this you're going to work on. So the how might we, we're going to start doing some of synthesizing around that. And when we're in person, it's going to go fast. We only have 2 days. So thank you for modeling that. It's clear it's still in the extractive space. It's clear you're using narrative as a tool, that you're moving towards a regenerative economy, because you talk about sustainability and respect and limits of nature and care and sacredness in a lot of ways. So thank you. That was a great example. And then I know we're trying to make this short, and so you could watch it maybe while you're cooking or taking care of the kids, or driving on your headphones. So I just wanted to talk about the fall solutions. I always feel like this is what I take away, because this is how I can talk to people about what the Just Transition Framework is. And again, just a big shout out to everybody who contributed to the framework, all of your colleagues at the Climate Justice Alliance, Movement Generation, and all our original folks from the EJ movement. But this is how I try to simplify the framework, and I've used these talking points multiple times. And I want to be clear that even though we don't say race a lot here, or environmental racism, these are all all these false solutions are embedded in the extractive economy, which is embedded on the exploitation of Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color, marginalized by the very nature of the system. So I like, these are the three, right? False solutions, extract, and concentrate wealth and political power. I would say just power, concentrate wealth and power. That's a false solution. So even if we're reducing carbon and like carbon is being, carbon offsets, for example, you're saying you're reducing it, but it's still a concentration of wealth and power is in the same hands, then we know it's a false solution, right? And like all the market-based solutions might feel like they're making change, but they're really not. The second false solution kind of category is if false solutions continue to poison, displace, and imprison communities. Right, so you might be seeing some of the clean, you were saying, Jesus, nature-based solutions. We say clean coal or clean energy based on nuclear, or clean energy based on incineration or biofuels. We know that that will displace, there's land grabs involved. Communities are still breathing in pollution because we haven't fully moved our energy sources to renewables. So even if we have an electric vehicle in every home, if that electricity is still coming from coal plants or extractive energy, it's still a false solution. And then the third false solution is reduce the climate crisis to a crisis of carbon. So we think about, if in your conversations around the climate crisis, we're constantly just talking about reducing carbon and not all the implications of justice that are involved around it, then that conversation is moving towards a false solution, a distracting solution. We say incremental solutions. We often mention solutions that don't have the majority of the people in its plan for a climate justice fix. And I really love that you mentioned, Jesus, techno fixes, because I think that's the biggest crisis we're finding when communities are trying to trying to fight against industries, that they're coming up with techno fixes as what they're talking about, carbon capture sequestration as a tool now to maintain the coal industry. But you talked about technology, like ancestral technology, right? And I've also been trying to practice that more often, is that our community should be comfortable talking about technology. We're not techno averse, we just rely on different technology. So maybe I'll ask you to elaborate a little bit on that, because I really loved how you said that, and I think it's a good way to close out our conversation.
So false solutions is everyday work. We can enumerate them because just governments and corporations just they're trying, they are offering their way of doing things. And in most of the cases, there are false solutions. In the case of the food sovereignty movement or agricultural movement worldwide, this industrial agribusiness model promotes many false solutions. One of them is one that I mentioned briefly. Especially they're mentioning these solutions in spaces where civil society is also there, like the Climate Change Conference of the UN that's done every year at the end of the year. So they're talking about climate smart agriculture. They're talking about nature-based solutions. They're using catchy language, right? And we need, when you read about what they propose, you then learn that it is a false solutions, that it is anchored in profit, and that in the case of climate smart agriculture is really using technology, but not that technology that practices the ancestral wisdom that people that need to farm to live, but really just using any type of technology that could be any way of geoengineering or more virtual technology, machines, to substitute people in order, like, oh, there's gonna be precipitation, like there's gonna be drought, so we have these systems and we don't need like people, etc. And we know that's not possible, you know, because the farming and working with the land looks very different. Even in Puerto Rico, we're a small island. Yeah, the way they're doing in Toa Alta farming and applying these principles of agroecology and sustainable farming is very different than the way they're doing it in Maya West, in the west side, or in the south in Ponce, where it is more hotter. Even though, you know, we're in a tropical climate, you feel the differences. So, and people know that from generation to generation. And we say like the future of humanity depends on that wisdom, on that intergenerational work. So in that sense, yeah, we say that's a false solution. And what do we promote? Agroecology. Agroecology as a food system, you know, that does not depend on external inputs, that it's about defending the territory and addressing the needs of the community, but it's also science based on scientific principles of laws of nature, right? Not made up by people, by men. And also it is a way of life, right? We're living in harmony with Mother Earth. We're not abusing, we're not exploiting, and we have the responsibility of taking care for now, but also for the future generation. So it's not like, oh no, we're just fighting the bad. We're building the new every day. We're practicing that, and especially after all the people that came before and that we're doing that in order that we can continue. Another thing that I'll mention about false solution is something that we're working currently here in Puerto Rico within my organization that has to do with energy and renewable energy. It can get tricky, the false solutions, because they're promoting, we have a public policy that we say, you know, after a lot of push from communities and organizations, we want Puerto Rico to be completely renewable in 2050, I believe. And so the government is saying, okay, so if we have that public policy now, so let's bring all of these foreign corporations to invest in solar farms. So what we're doing now, even though we promote the renewable energy, sustainable energy, right? We live in the tropics, there's a lot of sun, but we promote it in a decentralized way, in a community way, using the roofs, right? So the government is saying, okay, no, let's use public farming land, like the land that we have available for our food sovereignty. I mean, that it's not available. We have to struggle a lot just to access it, even though it should be really for us there. But they want to build these solar farms in thousands and thousands of acres in farming land. So it's so we've had to we created a campaign so that everybody, because people are surviving in Puerto Rico, there's too many challenges. So in order to bring this to the public opinion, and also we've done lawsuits in order to stop them, and we've managed to stop some, but there are like 18 of them projects. And we're just creating debate in almost every week in the press, in interviews, and just getting the word out, because it's really serious, and it's a false solution, right? Okay, cool, renewable energy, but not in farming land, especially when you can do the same in other spaces, abandoned spaces that the government has, the roofs of many of the building and the houses. And we've already seen what happened when hurricanes come. These solar farms, they are destroyed. So that's another false solution that we're experimenting on a daily basis here, and that you need to really pay attention, because what they say is like, you know, these people are so radical that they are even against renewable energy, and that's not the case. It's that we are for renewable, but not in farming land, right? Especially in the case of Puerto Rico with the vulnerability. So yeah, that would be it around that topic.
That's so interesting. I wrote here, solar farms are the new cash crop. You know, it's like, if we continue, even if there's something good in the middle of it, like solar, right? How do we know that solar panels have extractive chemicals and minerals to make them function. And so how much of that is in the hands of self-governance and local production and consumption? It's that values filter that we saw in the just transition. It's interesting, right? We can't make, I often think about the solar, like you said, if you're doing it on land, you have an actual land grab, you're able to grab all that land versus reutilizing the infrastructure that's out there. You know, we didn't share enough of what's happening on this side of the relationship, but there has been a lot of work done on trying to vision a new kind of infrastructure, you know, from before of the Green New Deal and all of that work, trying to put forth the Build Back Better, Build Back Better, it's a tongue twister, the Build Back Better Act, and, you know, communities being able to vision large scale but localized investments, right? Divesting from how could we use the kind of money that industry has at a very localized, distributed level, right? Translocally using that in ways that are in the domain of self-governance. Anyway, this is a great call. I always love to talk to you, Jesus. I always learn, and you know, I thank you. I thank your ancestors. I think the experiences that you've been able to share with us in Puerto Rico and here on food justice, on so much more than that. And I can't wait to see you in Miami.
Me too. We're happy that that's happening soon, and we'll be there, and we're also excited by this process. And I'll end by mentioning a quote that from his grandfather that has stayed with me for a while. It says, si es necesario, tiene que ser posible. So if it's necessary, it has to be possible. So that's kind of a punchline, just to remind us that a lot of the challenges that we work may seem hardcore or impossible, but that also, I think, has a lot to do with our ancestral legacy, right? So yeah. I'm sure Juan can explain this more in person, but it stayed with us in our last meeting.
That's beautiful. Yes, I can't wait to hear and hear all las Jotas and meet all las Jotas in person, and everyone else. You did an amazing challenge to all the fellows. Get your problem into 6 sentences or less. Find it in the extractive system. Don't be in the regenerative. We're getting there together, under the sun in Miami. Safe travels for everyone. See you soon.